They always talked about that kid in the neighborhood, the one who could vanish down the street before you even blinked. His parents weren't wealthy, but they let him roam the cracked asphalt roads, racing the stray dogs for fun. His older brother swore he once chased down an ice cream truck just for the thrill of it. The school playground was nothing more than faded lines on concrete, yet whenever he stepped up to race, the air changed, like everyone was holding their breath. It wasn't until a worn-out PE teacher timed him in a 40-meter dash that people started looking at him differently. "This one's got wheels," the man muttered, loud enough for half the class to hear. The whispers began, comparisons to sprinters he'd never met, and eventually, the name, Usain Bolt. At first, it sounded like a joke. Then he went home, found those old Beijing and London races on YouTube, and watched Bolt grin at 85 meters while the world tried to catch him. The wow moment came one afternoon during a scrappy school soccer game. The ball was screaming toward the sideline, already past everyone else. But he tore across the field, overtook the last defender, and got there before it rolled out. The other kids froze. He just smiled like it was nothing. From that day on, nobody called him by his name. He was the fast one, and yet the real story doesn't start there. It starts later, when the stopwatch replaced the cheers and speed became more than a gift. It became a test. They said it was just another Saturday morning at the track, but anyone watching could tell something was different. The boys stood at the edge of the lane, stretching in the cool fog, while a man in dark sunglasses watched without a word. That man was Coach Rivas, the one everyone whispered about, the guy who could turn raw speed into medals. The first run was over in seconds, but the coach's verdict was longer. "Explosive start, but your form leaks power. Running fast isn't enough. You need to run right." It wasn't a compliment. It was an invitation into a new world. From then on, the workouts stopped being playful sprints. They became deliberate, dissected. Heavy sled pulls to build drive. Block starts repeated until his calves screamed. Stride drills to lock in rhythm. No more just run until you're tired. Now, every movement had a reason. Every set had a target number. The sessions were short on comfort and long on precision. The changes bled into everything else. Weekend basketball games vanished from his calendar. Pickup soccer in the park was too risky. Meals became measured in grams. Sleep came earlier than his parents. And the loudest music he heard now was the thud of spikes on the track. Friends called it discipline. To him, it felt like a trade, freedom for fractions of a second. But those fractions were addictive. Every time the stopwatch flashed a smaller number, he told himself it was worth it. He was no longer just a kid who ran because it felt good. He was an apprentice in the craft of speed, and in that craft there was no such thing as good enough. The stopwatch didn't care about sacrifice, only about who could take the pressure and who would break. The stadium had gone quiet in that tense, razor-thin way only a final heat can manage. In lane 5, a young sprinter bounced lightly on his toes, eyes locked on the finish line. In lane 6, his rival, a newcomer with the composure of a veteran, was already crouched in the blocks, motionless. The gun fired. For the first 80 meters, they were even. Then, like a shadow slipping free from its owner, the newcomer surged ahead, crossing the line 0.03 seconds faster. On the scoreboard, the numbers looked microscopic. In reality, they were the difference between making the national junior team and watching it on TV. The coach would later replay the race in slow motion. A fractionally better drive phase, a slightly cleaner transition, one stride less over the distance. The data didn't lie. At this level, 0.05 seconds lost early might as well be an eternity. The boy in lane 5 wasn't just racing opponents anymore. He was chasing a ghost version of himself, the one from last season who seemed impossible to catch. And the comparisons never stopped. His peers were matching his times. Younger sprinters were overtaking them. The title of fastest in his age group had gone from a badge of pride to a weight he couldn't shake. Losing it wasn't just about slipping down a ranking, it felt like losing a piece of his identity altogether. But the season didn't pause for reflection. The next race was already on the calendar, and somewhere out there, another nameless rival was training to take even more than just a title. The sound wasn't loud, but it was final, like a guitar string snapping in an empty room. Spectators thought it was just another training sprint. But Coach Velasquez knew the moment he saw his athletes stumble mid-stride. It wasn't fatigue, it was something breaking. Rewind a few minutes, a cool morning, track damp with fog, a set of 60-meter starts to open up the legs. The first burst looked clean, powerful drive, good knee lift, until, 20 meters in, the runner's face changed. Pain as a way of stealing speed before the clock does. He pulled up, grabbing the back of his thigh, the way sprinters always do when hamstrings betray them. Rehab began the same day. Ice, compression, and MRI that confirmed what everyone already feared. The next few weeks weren't about breaking records, they were about relearning motion. Resistance bands replaced starting blocks. Slow jogs on an anti-gravity treadmill replaced the whip-crack violence of acceleration. But even when the muscle healed, something else lingered, a shadow in his mind. Every time he pushed hard, the question crept in, will it tear again? That doubt was heavier than any sled pull. Recovery became ritual. Ultrasound therapy, pool sessions to spare the joints, protein and omega-3 supplements measured with the precision of lap times. The sports physio explained the science. Sprinters live in the red zone, driving their hamstrings and Achilles past normal human thresholds. The margin between brilliance and breakdown is measured in fibers, microscopic threads that either hold or snap. He returned to the track eventually. The clock still ticked, but his stride was different. Just enough caution to keep him whole, and just enough to slow him down. And in sprinting, hesitation is the one injury no trainer can treat. The next race was already looming, but this time the fear of losing wasn't the only thing chasing him. The meet hadn't even started, yet the race had already begun. Inside the call room, 10 men sat in silence, each in their own bubble. To an outsider, it looked like a waiting area. To anyone who's been there, it was the first round of battle. Across from him sat 2 world champions, one scrolling through his phone, the other staring at the floor as if memorizing the track's every contour. Before that moment came the rituals. Check-in with the officials, the awkward sponsor photos, the brief lap around the track to test the spring underfoot, adjusting starting blocks down to the millimeter. Even the wind readings were analyzed like classified intel. In professional sprinting, control over tiny variables was the only comfort you got. But sprinting at this level wasn't just about running. Sponsors expected him to smile into cameras, to post on social media, to wear their gear in every shot. The media wanted quick quotes and marketable celebrations, and all the while, every cost, flights, hotels, therapy sessions, supplements, had to be paid for, one way or another. Without solid contracts, many athletes quietly bled money just to stay on the circuit. Sometimes, choices weren't about training, they were about survival. Take the payday appearance at a low-tier meet and risk over-racing, or skip it, focus on the championship and risk having no paycheck for the month. Every decision carried a cost, and the margin for error, financial or physical, was just as tight as the one on the track. On race day, standing next to Bolt or Lyles, the difference wasn't just speed, it was presence. Bolt devoured the track with strides that seemed almost unfair. Lyles owned the crowd as much as he owned the race. They weren't just athletes, they were brands. And for everyone else, the challenge wasn't only keeping up, it was staying visible in a sport where invisibility could end a career faster than any pulled muscle. But visibility meant more races, more stress, and more risk. And somewhere beyond the noise and the cameras, the clock was still waiting, cold, impartial, and ready to decide who stayed and who disappeared. The crowd didn't notice. They were still clapping for the winner, cameras flashing at the podium. But Coach Martin knew what had just happened. He'd seen it too many times before. His athlete, once a guaranteed top 3 finisher, had just crossed the line in 6th place. It hadn't always been this way. Just 2 seasons earlier, on the very same track, he'd clocked 10:12 and stood under the stadium lights with a medal around his neck. Today, the scoreboard showed 10.36. No false start, no injury, just a body that no longer snapped back like it used to. The real blow didn't come on the track. It came weeks later in an email. The invitation list for the Diamond League had gone out. His name wasn't there. In its place were runners who, not long ago, had been chasing him. Younger, fresher, with times that now belonged to the future. The conversation with Coach was quiet, almost too gentle. We might need to think about moving you to the 200 or the 4x100 relay. You've still got experience, endurance. That counts for something. It was a tactical pivot, a way to stretch a career. But both of them knew. It wasn't a path back to the summit. From then on, every race felt different. He wasn't running to win titles anymore. He was running to hold on to seasons, to delay the moment when someone else would take his lane, his bib number, and the story that used to be his. And just beyond the curve, the next race and the next challenger was already waiting. From the stands, he looked like any other coach, arms folded, cap pulled low, watching his athletes warm up. Only those who knew him understood the irony. Not long ago, he was the one on that track, in that lane, chasing the same clock. The end hadn't come in a dramatic fall or a farewell race. It came quietly, in the form of an empty inbox. No invitations, no contracts, no calls. One season bled into the next, and suddenly there was no next season. He tried to fill the gap. Took a job coaching the local juniors, stepped into the commentary booth for a few smaller meets, even experimented with office work. spreadsheets and coffee breaks replacing sprints and starting blocks. But nothing hit like the countdown in the call room or the surge off the line. Financial reality arrived early. Without prize money or sponsorship bonuses, every bill felt heavier. The adrenaline rush that used to pay for itself now had to be earned in quieter, slower ways. He still went to meets, not to race, but to watch. And every time the starter's pistol cracked, his eyes went straight to the lane he once called his own. Watching younger runners burst from the blocks, he felt pride and a hollow echo where purpose used to live. Conversations with old rivals were different now. Some traded stories over coffee. Others disappeared into their own new lives. The shared language of splits, wind readings, and lane assignments had faded. The true ending came not on a track, but in a living room, flipping channels, landing on a broadcast where his event was underway. No one said his name. No one remembered to. That was when he knew. The race was over. But endings have a way of hiding new starts. Somewhere out there, a kid was discovering they were the fastest in their schoolyard, and didn't yet know what that would cost. From the outside, it looked like a normal season break. No press conference, no farewell lap, no emotional last race. But for those who knew him, the silence was telling. The email with the next season's invitations had gone out. His name wasn't on it. Before that moment, there had been signs, a few slower finishes, a sponsorship that quietly ended, a message from an old rival who had moved on. But the final cut was clean. One day he was a competitor, the next he was just watching. He tried to rebuild a life without the track. Took a coaching role with a local junior squad. Spent weekends in commentary booths, describing races instead of running them. Even dabbled in office work, spreadsheets replacing split times, coffee breaks replacing call rooms. The work was steady, but the air didn't taste like it used to before a starter's pistol. Money became a quieter pressure. Without prize purses or appearance fees, every expense was deliberate. The sport that once paid for everything now cost more to follow than to leave behind. He still went to meets, sitting high in the stands. His eyes always drifted to lane 4, the lane he used to own. Watching young sprinters stretch, settle into the blocks, and explode forward, he felt a mixture of pride and a sharp awareness that the race no longer belonged to him. Old teammates stayed in touch, but less often. Some vanished into new careers, new families. The shared language of training loads and wind readings faded until it felt like a dialect from a country he no longer lived in. The real ending came on an ordinary evening, flipping through channels, landing on a broadcast of his event. No one mentioned his name, not even in passing. That was when it hit him. The stopwatch had stopped. But endings, in sport, are rarely the end. Somewhere, a kid was still racing barefoot in a schoolyard, not knowing the weight of the journey ahead. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth watching.